In 1976, a young woman in Germany endured 67 exorcisms over 10 brutal months. Anneliese Michel believed she was possessed by demons, but the truth behind her story is far more complex and far more terrifying. Was it a battle between good and evil, or a tragic case of misdiagnosed mental illness? Tonight, as the fire crackles softly in the background, we unravel the haunting real-life horror of Anneliese Michel's exorcism. Settle in, and prepare yourself for a journey into the unknown. Anneliese Michel was born on September 21, 1952, in Liebelfing, Bavaria, Germany, to a devoutly Catholic family. Her parents, Joseph and Anna Michel, were strict adherents to Catholic traditions and raised their children with a strong sense of religious duty and guilt over sin. Anneliese, the third of 4 daughters, was described as a sensitive and pious child, deeply committed to her faith from an early age. Her family's religious beliefs were extreme by even Catholic standards. Anna Michel, her mother, had once considered becoming a nun before marrying Joseph. This religious intensity was partly driven by a deep sense of guilt and atonement within the family. For instance, Anna had an older illegitimate child, Martha, from a previous relationship, which was considered a serious sin at the time. This past, combined with her mother's deep faith, led Anneliese to feel immense pressure to make amends for sins, both her own and those of others. Anneliese's older sister, Martha, died at the age of 8 due to complications from surgery, and her mother saw this tragedy as divine punishment for her earlier transgressions. This created a climate of religious fear in the household, where the concept of sin and the need for penance were emphasized to an extreme degree. Anneliese grew up with a strong desire to please God and protect her family from further punishment. She was particularly devoted to the Virgin Mary and even expressed a desire to become a school teacher of religious studies. However, her path was tragically diverted when, at 16, she experienced her first epileptic seizure and was diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy, an event that marked the beginning of her long and troubled battle with illness and spiritual turmoil. Over time, her condition worsened, manifesting in hallucinations and increasingly bizarre behavior. The case took a dark turn when Anneliese began to attribute her experiences to demonic possession rather than illness, a belief strongly supported by her deeply religious family. She underwent 67 exorcism rites over 10 months, performed by 2 priests, Arnold Renz and Ernst Alt, under the guidance of the Catholic Church. Despite medical treatment, including anti-seizure medications like Dilantin, her condition worsened. Over time, she began to exhibit extreme symptoms that puzzled her doctors. Anneliese claimed to see terrifying visions of demonic faces and to hear voices damning her to hell. These experiences began to erode her mental health, and she increasingly sought answers within her faith, believing that she was being tormented by evil forces. Her family, particularly her mother Anna Michel, leaned heavily on their religious beliefs to make sense of what was happening. Despite seeking medical help, the family began to turn towards the church for answers when it became clear that conventional treatments were not working. Anneliese herself was convinced that she was possessed, describing her internal struggles as battles with demonic forces. This shift marked the beginning of a long and grueling ordeal that would cost Anneliese her life. Anneliese Michel experienced a series of terrifying and distressing episodes that she, her family, and later her spiritual advisors believed were signs of demonic possession. One of the most recurring and distressing visions Anneliese experienced was the sight of devilish faces. She described seeing grotesque, monstrous faces, often with distorted features, glaring at her. These faces would appear to her at random times, both during the day and at night. The faces were terrifying, sneering, and filled her with overwhelming fear and dread. She felt these faces were demons, constantly taunting her and reinforcing her belief that she was possessed. Anneliese also described experiencing visions of hell during her episodes. She believed she saw what hell looked like, an environment filled with flames, darkness, and torment. In these visions, she would hear the screams of the damned and feel the overwhelming sense of despair and hopelessness that came with being eternally separated from God. At the height of her fits, Anneliese claimed to see demonic entities and figures in her surroundings. These dark figures would loom over her or appear in the shadows, threatening and watching her. She said they were demons who were either inhabiting her body or haunting her, trying to take full control. At times she felt as if these entities were physically present, standing near her and manipulating her body and mind. Anneliese reported seeing her own family members in distorted and horrific forms. She would look at her mother or other loved ones and instead see demonic versions of them with twisted, deformed faces or grotesque bodies. Interestingly, while much of what Anneliese saw was terrifying, she also experienced visions involving religious figures and events. However, these were not peaceful or comforting. She would sometimes see images of the Virgin Mary or Jesus Christ, but in a distorted or mocking form. For example, she claimed to have seen the Virgin Mary weeping or appearing sorrowful, which she interpreted as a sign of her own damnation. In some instances, Anneliese described seeing animals or insects in unnatural ways during her fits. She reported seeing dogs or other creatures with demonic features, like glowing red eyes or twisted bodies, that seemed to represent evil spirits. Insects also played a role in her hallucinations, with Anneliese sometimes seeing herself eating or being surrounded by these creatures during her attacks. During her episodes, she also described seeing herself as if she were outside her own body, watching herself being tormented and controlled by demons. In these moments, she believed she could see the demonic possession manifest physically in her own appearance, claiming that her face and body looked monstrous or unnatural as the demons took control. The Catholic Church, which is typically cautious in approving exorcisms, was initially reluctant to sanction the rites. However, after reviewing Anneliese's case, the local bishop eventually approved the exorcisms under the ancient Rituale Romanum, a traditional Catholic rite. Alton Renz began the exorcism sessions in 1975, with the first session taking place in September of that year. Over the next 10 months, Anneliese would undergo a total of 67 exorcisms, each lasting several hours, during which she exhibited what were described as supernatural phenomena. During the sessions, Anneliese would often speak in guttural voices, reportedly identifying herself as various demons, including Lucifer, Judas, Nero, Cain, and Hitler. The priests documented these sessions extensively, including audio recordings, some of which still exist today. The exorcists claimed that she displayed extraordinary strength, spoke in languages she had never learned, and exhibited knowledge of events she could not have known about. However, skeptics argue that these were manifestations of her severe mental and physical illness, exacerbated by the religious environment she was immersed in. Anneliese's case straddled the line between medical science and religious belief, with two conflicting narratives emerging, one grounded in medical diagnoses and another in spiritual warfare. On the medical side, experts diagnosed her with epilepsy and severe psychosis, suggesting that her deteriorating condition was the result of her mental health issues. Neurologists who had treated her were adamant that her symptoms, including her visions and voices, were linked to her epilepsy and likely exacerbated by the medications she was taking. One of the notable physicians involved in her case was Dr. Richard Roth, a family friend and physician who was called in to observe Anneliese during one of her exorcism sessions. Dr. Roth is reported to have remarked that there was no scientific explanation for what he witnessed during the exorcism, though this statement has been debated. Some sources suggest that he commented it was a case beyond medical understanding, while others state he was skeptical of the possession claims but found her symptoms perplexing. Another key medical figure was Dr. Luthi, who examined Anneliese when her symptoms became increasingly physical and erratic. By this point, she had started displaying extreme behaviors such as self-harm, starvation, and uncontrollable outbursts. While Dr. Luthi recommended continued medical treatment, Anneliese's family had already begun turning toward religious explanations, believing that she was possessed. However, her family and the priests believed that Anneliese's symptoms were the result of demonic possession, pointing to her increasingly erratic behavior and aversion to sacred objects. Anneliese herself also rejected medical explanations, believing wholeheartedly that she was possessed and that only exorcism could save her soul. This divide between medical and religious perspectives is one of the key elements of her case, raising profound questions about the limits of both faith and science. As her condition worsened, Anneliese's physical health began to fail. She stopped eating, claiming that the demons inside her would not allow it, leading to extreme malnutrition. Despite this, her family and the priests pressed on with the exorcisms, believing that she could still be saved. The tension between faith and medicine came to a tragic head in the final months of her life, as both sides seemingly failed to provide the help she desperately needed. By early 1976, Anneliese's condition had deteriorated dramatically. She was emaciated, weak, and barely able to walk. The exorcisms continued, with each session becoming more intense and grueling for both Anneliese and those involved. In the final months, she would often lapse into periods of catatonic silence, broken only by violent fits in which she would thrash about uncontrollably or bark like a dog. The sessions were documented through audio recordings that captured the disturbing nature of these rituals. In the days leading up to her death, Anneliese reportedly told her mother that she was ready to die, claiming that she had atoned for the sins of others. On July 1, 1976, after enduring her final exorcism, Anneliese passed away in her family home. The official cause of death was malnutrition and dehydration, exacerbated by the extreme physical and psychological stress of the exorcisms. She weighed only 68 pounds at the time of her death. Her death sent shockwaves through the local community and beyond. To some, it was a tragic result of untreated mental illness. To others, it was the ultimate sacrifice of a young woman who died battling the forces of evil. Her parents, however, remained steadfast in their belief that Anneliese was possessed, maintaining that the exorcisms had been necessary. Following Anneliese's death, the German authorities launched an investigation, which culminated in a high-profile trial that drew international attention. In 1978, Anneliese's parents, along with Father Alt and Father Renz, were charged with negligent homicide. The prosecution argued that Anneliese's death could have been prevented if she had received proper medical treatment, and that the exorcisms sanctioned by the Church were acts of neglect. The trial became a clash between faith and medicine, with the defense arguing that Anneliese had been possessed and that the priest had acted in her best interest by performing the exorcisms. Expert witnesses for the prosecution, including neurologists and psychiatrists, testified that Anneliese's symptoms were consistent with epilepsy and psychosis, and that her death was the result of malnutrition brought on by her refusal to eat. On the other side, the defense presented evidence from the exorcism sessions, including the tapes of Anneliese's voice purportedly possessed by demons, to bolster their claims of possession. In the end, the court found the defendants guilty of manslaughter resulting from negligence but gave them relatively light sentences: 6 months in jail, later suspended, and 3 years of probation. The verdict was controversial as it raised deep questions about the role of religion in medical treatment, the limits of personal belief, and the responsibility of individuals in such complex cases. The Exorcism of Anneliese Michel has had a lasting impact, both in terms of its legal and cultural legacy. Legally, the case led to increased scrutiny of exorcism practices within the Catholic Church, which has since become more cautious in approving such rites. The case also highlighted the need for better mental health care and a more nuanced understanding of the intersection between faith and mental illness. Culturally, the story of Anneliese Michel has inspired books, documentaries, and films, the most famous of which is The Exorcism of Emily Rose, 2005, a film that blends horror and legal drama to tell a fictionalized version of the case. The real-life story, however, remains far more complex and tragic, serving as a grim reminder of the dangers of extreme religious belief and the failure of both medical and spiritual institutions to adequately address mental illness. Anneliese Michel's grave in Klingenberg has become a site of pilgrimage for some, who believe that she truly died as a martyr in the battle against evil. Others see her story as a cautionary tale about the perils of fanaticism and the importance of seeking balanced, compassionate care for those suffering from mental illness. The legacy of her case continues to provoke debate, inviting reflection on the fine line between belief, mental health, and human suffering. If you found Anneliese's story as captivating and haunting as I have, please consider subscribing to Chilling Fireside Stories. Your support allows me to continue bringing these true horror stories to light, from unsolved mysteries to paranormal events. It means the world to me to have your encouragement as I dive deeper into the darkest corners of history, sharing the stories that demand to be told. Together, we can uncover the terrifying truths behind these real-life events, one fireside tale at a time. Please don't forget to like, share, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Your support truly means so much and helps keep this channel growing, enabling me to continue exploring these incredible stories with you. Stay curious, stay warm, and see you on the next one.